Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has highlighted revelations that US President Donald Trump planned to invade and annex Venezuela. The United States imposed its harshest sanctions yet against Syria on Wednesday to prevent President Bashar al-Assad from achieving a military victory. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa announced a further easing of restrictions despite a sharp increase in the number of COVID-19 cases. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, I'm Katrina Goss. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro stressed that according to a book to be published by former US National Security Advisor John Bolton, President Trump was considering an intervention in Venezuela.
According to the memoirs, with no known publication date, Trump stated that invading Venezuela would be cool. Invading Venezuela would be a cool thing. Soldiers, police, workers, listen to this. Invading Venezuela would be a cool thing. Donald Trump still believes that. He also wrote that the president said that Venezuela was already part of the United States. In other words, that we are not Venezuelan, we are gringos. There it is. The truth is being revealed. The truth is coming out about what we have been dealing with and what we have defeated during these years, 2019 and 2020, and we will continue to defeat.
And President Maduro also noted that according to the revelations, President Trump intended to invade Venezuela in order to annex its territory.
Trump intended to invade Venezuela in order to convert it into United States territory. This is the breaking news today because of the release of the book by John Bolton, who is an American diplomat and ex-advisor to President Donald Trump. Bolton revealed that President Trump considered Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaidó as weak and childish in comparison with President Maduro.
And the Venezuelan president also offered an update on COVID-19 figures this Wednesday, noting it was the most bitter day of the epidemic in the country. President Maduro reported 159 new locally transmitted COVID-19 cases, of which 132 occurred at Las Pulgas market in the city of Maracaibo. Meanwhile, 72 cases were imported, of which 56 were nationals returning from Colombia and 16 from Brazil. The Venezuelan president stressed that new special measures are under consideration and will be announced to protect the Venezuelan population, as new cases entering the country irregularly from Colombia and Brazil pose a threat to major Venezuelan cities. Different sectors in Chile are denouncing that beginning this week, grassroots media will not be able to go out to report, not even in nearby towns, as a restriction on movement was imposed by authorities. While the measure aims at controlling the spread of the coronavirus, it will also have direct effects on freedom of expression.
The repression against the people's media, which has been key during the social uprising, will no longer be necessary. They simply will not be able to go out and report anymore. Under the pretext of preventive measures to address the coronavirus pandemic, press freedom will be further hampered under Chile's new restrictions. And instructions from the Undersecretary of the Interior prohibits press workers from moving with their credentials alone, and now it requires a collective permit that can only be accessed by media which is incorporated as companies within the tax system.
This leaves out a lot of small media outlets that are fundamental at this time, especially in smaller towns where there is no other media that fill in that function.
They have a key role as they are communitarian media, who know the local reality. They cover the local issues, they run campaigns and report on things that would not be known if it wasn't for them, just as they do during the social unrest.
We believe that this government is preparing the path for the next social unrest which is coming, where it will aim to censor media even more, those who tell the truth, those who do not lie, those who are not paid by the system. It turns out that these same mainstream media are the ones that occupy material from the independent media. This is how it is during the social outburst, the riot. Independent media are the ones which did the reporting, which were later used by mainstream media because they were not actually on the ground.
In fact, weeks passed before the official media reported on the aggressions of carabineros during the outburst, which left almost 450 people as victims of eye trauma. The coordinator of Chile's eye trauma victims wants to send all solidarity to the independent and community media that nowadays the government wants to silence. We believe that they are fundamental to telling the truth about what is happening in this country. But so far, at least they haven't been able to do that, even though the first 2020 report of the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights was clear in demanding that the government provide the necessary guarantees of free expression during the pandemic.
Chile is restricting this access to small media, particularly digital, TV or print media. This has to be corrected because it is a threat to freedom of expression and inequality against the larger corporative media, the mainstream.
We have demanded the government authorities to modify the criteria, which especially affects independent journalists, community and alternative media, which fulfill an invaluable and transcendent task in the territories in the midst of this social, economic and health crisis. If this same trend continues, it could end up the popular communicators once again behind bars, and now for up to 3 years.
Italo Retamal y Paola Drachnik, Telesur, Chile.
In Brazil, one of the most iconic defenders of the Amazon rainforest has died after contracting the coronavirus. 65-year-old Indigenous chief Paulino Paikan died of COVID-19 on Tuesday in a hospital in the city of Rendensau. The environmental leader had accused the government of Jair Bolsonaro of neglecting indigenous communities. Paikan gained world fame on leading the fight against the construction of a hydroelectric power plant in Belo Monte in the 1980s. He also worked to build alliances around the world to save the Amazon.
Paulino Paikan is an authentic leader, a traditional leader who also knew politics. He's a victim of coronavirus, of COVID-19, and today leaves us with great memories, learning, and much nostalgia.
Panama has rolled out rapid coronavirus tests following a recent jump in daily cases. The rapid tests were purchased in Europe and China and have been tested and verified by the Gorgas Memorial Institute, the country's leading medical research center, with results available within 48 hours. Meanwhile, health workers have visited homes in the populous community of Nuevo Tocumen, one of the most affected areas in the country, where they targeted families who have reported one of their members being sick, as well as those who have presented symptoms or have had contact with a positive case. Panama has registered over 21,000 confirmed cases and more than 400 COVID-19 fatalities.
The intention is to continue to do mass testing more and more. For example, in the last reports, there were 3 consecutive days of 600 cases or more. There was also a report of 800 cases. That is the reflection that we are doing more the tests. If they continue to abuse flexibilization, probably the third block, sectors that are reopening after lockdown measures, won't open, and even the risk of closing previous block is there. We might also close the second or even the first. Therefore, we need the population to continue collaborating and taking care of themselves so that we can do the job properly.
More stories coming up after this very short break, so stay with us. From the south. Bahamas Tourism Minister Dionisio de Aguilar said health regulations resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic will limit the number of people that the tourism industry can accommodate. As major resorts in the Bahamas announced they won't be reopening until later in the year, the minister said that it could take at least 18 months for the tourism industry to fully rebound. He noted that many large resorts would be operating at a loss if they were to open next month. Meanwhile, the Atlantis Resort, the largest private employer in the country, is set to reopen on July 7th. However, the Melia Nassau Beach Resort will not open until October, and Club Med on the island of San Salvador is not expected to reopen until later in the year. Also in the Bahamas, Minister of Education Jeffrey Lloyd has shut down a number of establishments that were operating without legal authority and putting young children at risk. During the last budget debate, the minister warned all operators of education services to register with the National Accreditation and Equivalency Council of the Bahamas. Lloyd said anyone who does not register with the council will be operating outside of the law, for which there are serious penalties. The minister also called on Bahamians to be very careful when choosing institutions for their children's education.
That students, once they exit high school or college, need to come to the workplace.
Canadian gold mining company IAMGOLD halted operations at the Rosebel gold mine in Suriname as union reps issued a stop work order after 7 employees tested positive for the novel coronavirus. The company said the infected employees were quarantined and it was taking steps to disinfect workers' living and work areas, but the trade union used one of its preventative measures as the basis to stop work. IAMGOLD said it had implemented social distancing rules, sanitary measures and reduced its on-site staff at the mine after the outbreak. The Rosebel gold mine is majority owned by the Canadian company, while the government of Suriname holds a 5% stake. The United States imposed its harshest sanctions yet against Syria on Wednesday to prevent President Bashar al-Assad from achieving a military victory. The new travel restrictions and financial sanctions authorise a freeze on the assets of anyone dealing with Syria, regardless of nationality, and cover many more sectors. The sanctions also target those dealing with entities from Russia and Iran. The unilateral measures were imposed under an executive order and the so-called Caesar Syria Civilian Protection Act. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the new steps were the start of a sustained campaign of economic and political pressure against President Assad and vowed more in the coming weeks. Russia, China and Syria have strongly condemned the move, which comes in the face of the Syrian government's advances against US-backed terrorists and at a time when the country is facing a severe economic crisis. US President Donald Trump has sued his former national security advisor, John Bolton, in an attempt to block the publication of his memoirs, which he claimed are filled with classified information. The book addresses an array of topics such as chaos in the White House, the president's inconsistency, his haphazard decision-making process, and his dealings with allies and enemies alike. Bolton's lawyer says the White House is using national security justifications as an excuse to stop him from talking, which could lead to criminal charges. Mexico, Canada and the United States announced they will maintain restrictions on movements at their borders. The measure extends the ban on crossing from one country to another through July 21st. The US-Mexico border is one of the most active in the world, as over 1 million people normally cross it every day. Officials announced on Tuesday that the US, Mexico and Canada decided to extend the restrictions on non-essential travel across their borders for 30 days. The United Nations elected 4 new non-permanent members of the Security Council this Wednesday. UN member states also elected Turkish diplomat and politician Volkan Bozkır as president of the 75th session of the UN General Assembly.
Having obtained the required two-thirds majority of members present and voting and the greatest number of votes, India, Ireland, Mexico, and Norway are elected members of the Security Council for a two-year term beginning on 1 January 2021. I congratulate the states that have been elected members of the Security Council.
In Belgium, dozens of freelance interpreters working in EU institutions have demonstrated in front of the European Parliament over a lack of financial assistance during the COVID-19 pandemic. Protesters say after virus lockdowns were implemented, their work has all but dried up, and now with a usual summer break around the corner, many will go without 5 months of income this year. Interpreters say they feel abandoned by the EU and are angered by the lack of financial aid while the body continues to preach solidarity. Around 1,200 freelance interpreters usually ensure simultaneous interpretations across the EU's 24 languages during conferences and events. The International Association of Conference Interpreters is negotiating with EU agencies to do better than their offer of an advance to be paid back when normal interpreting work resumes.
Solidarity, they've asked the member states to do it, they've set up a fund, but they're not practicing that solidarity that they're preaching within the institutions themselves, and that's quite problematic. And I think that a solution can be found, but for that they need to engage in proper social dialogue, they need to engage with our interpreters.
Mid-June. July's around the corner. We don't work in August anyway. That will take us through to September, and at that point, that will be roughly 5 months that some of us will have had no income, and all of us will have suffered from a marked drop in our income. So our patience essentially is beginning to run out, and that's why we've decided to up the game.
And we're taking one last very short break now, so stay with us for more. from the south. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa on Wednesday announced a further easing of restrictions despite a sharp increase in the number of COVID-19 cases. Ramaphosa said more sectors of the economy will be allowed to reopen as long as they observe health guidelines. Restaurants with limited capacity, personal care services including hairdressers, conference centres holding business-related gatherings, cinemas, theatres and casinos and non-contact sports will be allowed to resume their activities. South Africa has reported over 80,000 COVID-19 cases, while the death toll stands at over 1,600. And the South African president has called for drastic action on violence against women, which has surged during the current COVID-19 lockdown. During Wednesday's COVID-19 update, President Ramaphosa expressed concern regarding the rise in gender-based violence. During the lockdowns imposed across the world due to the coronavirus pandemic, domestic violence has been on the rise and protests have erupted in South Africa. However, the president has appealed for calm and called on citizens to work with the government to combat violence against women and children so that the country doesn't end up fighting two wars alongside the pandemic. African leaders thanked China for its solidarity and support to combat the coronavirus pandemic this Wednesday during an extraordinary China-Africa summit chaired by the Chinese president.
The strength of the bond between Africa and China is clear. The solidarity we have seen during this difficult time has once again demonstrated the productivity of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, whose 20th anniversary we will mark later this year. The government of the People's Republic of China and the Chinese private sector provided crucial supplies of testing materials and medical equipment in Africa when it was needed most.
Sino-Africa solidarity and better multilateral cooperation is key to winning the battle against this pandemic. Through this and other platforms, let us continue to strengthen the bonds of solidarity, of cooperation and collaboration that exist amongst us and take collective action to ensure the future of humanity.
On the World Day to combat desertification and drought, the Chinese Forestry and Grassland Administration noted that the country has made great strides in the prevention and control of desertification. With up to 8.8 million hectares of its desertified areas having been turned into green land since 2016, China has completed 88% of the target of rehabilitating 10 million hectares of such land. The country's fight against this phenomenon has advanced, together with its efforts to reduce poverty, with the development of eco-friendly industries in accordance with the conditions of sandy and desertified areas. Following grievances expressed by health practitioners on their salary review, the Zimbabwean government has increased salaries for all civil servants as well as pensions, as earnings have been eroded by inflation. The Ministry of Finance on Wednesday announced that civil servants' salaries and pensioners' allowances will be adjusted upwards by 50% with immediate effect. Meanwhile, some allowances, especially for health workers in COVID-19 response, will be paid in US dollars to curb the spiralling inflation in the country. Now we've come to the end of this news brief, but we finish with a clip of a video produced by the members of the UN Symphony Orchestra who came together to play a virtual concert in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website as well as on social media. For Teleso English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching and enjoy the music.